Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Weapons of H3VR. And today we are taking a look at this thing that's laying on the table. This is the M1A1 Bazooka. This is a very early anti-tank weapon. This is rocket propelled. It fires a 2.75-inch, I believe, um, rocket, a heat rocket. It also had um, smoke variants, and there was also actually a gas variant made of rocket but never used. So this was of course eventually developed because the US needed an anti-tank weapon. It was actually first developed during World War One. However, at some point, I believe this was very late World War One, so at some point the Germans, the armistice was signed and development was halted. But then later on, well, World War Two happened, so they needed. Oops. They need. I did not mean to fire that off. They needed another anti-tank weapon. So they developed this, fires a heat round, pops in the back, and it saw mixed success. It didn't. Most of this actually didn't see use against tanks, because, well, later in World War II, you had heavier tanks, and they would have armor skirts to counter these things, because the Germans, they would face this in North Africa as well as from the Russians. So in 1944, this was not that useful against tanks. Still useful, but not as useful as initially. And the Germans, smartly, they developed an 88mm version, the Panzersteg. I already got a video on that. The Americans, after the war, would create a 90mm version, I think, called the Super Bazooka, which is just like this thing, but super. Yeah, bad joke. Yeah, I think that covers basic history. It's just a metal tube with a rocket with a heat warhead. So it's pretty simple. It is electrically fired. I believe initial versions had a battery, but later on they had some system generating the charge when you pull the trigger. So when you loaded it, you had to pop in the round, do some electrical fiddly diddly do, and then you could fire. The Russians with the RPG, they just had a hammer fire. The RPG sounds a bit simpler. This is also unguided. It has simple iron sight, as you can see. The top one is 100, 200, and then 300 meter for the bottom one, if I got it right. Don't quote me on that. And really, it's a simple weapon. I think this weighed around 6 kilos, so not too heavy. It was very popular for use against fortifications like bunkers and such. Just fire a rocket into it, and as you can see, things blow up. So it was useful, but it had some drawbacks. It, of course, just like the Panzerschreck, if we fire it like so, it's got a backblast. So if you got some people behind you, or if you're shooting in a building, could be problematic. And it doesn't have that massive shield like the Panzerschreck has to protect you from the front blast. This weapon also has a problem of you kind of... it's obvious where you are when you shoot because of both the rocket flying and all of that blast. If we just shoot this there. Lots of smoke and such. Oh, it's obvious. And to shoot this thing, you also actually gotta rather expose yourself. So, not ideal, but still, it served the US during the Second World War and in the Korean War before it was replaced by the Super Bazooka. I also like to note, earlier versions of the rounds had a reliability issue when hitting. Let's place that away. Hitting armor at an angle, because of this sharp nose, it would just kind of blink, bounce off. So later of the versions would have a more rounded nose, so that less chance of ricocheting when hitting at a sharp angle. These also had problems with poor reliability in general, the early rounds, and problems with salt and such, which the Americans would solve by the Super Bazooka. They would also have multiple revisions of the sighting system. I believe this was the initial sighting system. They would later have some more complicated sighting systems. Early versions also had a foregrip, but this is just a tube. So no foregrip, only a back grip, I guess. They would have various variations of this thing, but fundamentally this is a pretty simple weapon. And of course, being a rocket fired out of a tube, there isn't that much recoil. There is some recoil though, but as you can see, not a lot. But really, I think this concludes the video on the bazooka. Maybe in the future we'll have a super bazooka and we'll have a video on that. But I do hope you enjoyed this quick little video on the bazooka. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and all of that. Vote for the whatever gun you want to see in the gun poll in the description below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Did it ever land? Well, I heard the explosion. Anyways, bye.